talk to a law professor in the US about this in just a moment, but perhaps worth mentioning, I think, before I do speak to her, that we are hearing via CBS News that the US Attorney General Merrick Garland has just announced an investigation into Minneapolis policing practices following on from the verdicts that came through last night. So the US Attorney General just announcing that the Justice Department will conduct a civil investigation into the force to see whether there has been a pattern or practice of unconstitutional policing. So that is coming via CBS News Radio in the States, reporting that announcement from the Justice Department. So a further investigation into the overall Minneapolis Police Department. Well, let's discuss the ramifications of last night's guilty verdicts. I'm joined by Professor Sonia Gipson Rankin, who is Professor of Law at the University of New Mexico and is also a former president of the New Mexico Black Lawyers Association. A very good afternoon to you, Professor.
Good afternoon, Jane.
And I would of course like to hear, just first of all, your personal response. What went through your mind when you heard those guilty verdicts read out?
It was, I think I was like a lot of people in the United States, surprised. And I still felt a heaviness in my heart because it shouldn't have come to this last breathtaking nail-biter moment. I think that's where a lot of people are right now.
And one of the many things that I think perhaps we've been struck following this in this country is the role here of bystanders. The fact that so much of the evidence, the video footage, came from members of the public who just happened to be there.
I'm so proud of that young lady who took the time to document. She didn't even fully know what she was watching, but she was part of history and part of the reason that we got to this conviction, right? Without that video, would we have gotten to a conviction? Would it have been more misdirection and things that have historically happened in these kinds of cases? So I think the role of the bystanders, the people who were willing to get on the stand and testify about what was so wrong about what they saw, was really powerful.
And President Biden says this is the beginning of something. This is a reset, if you like, of race relations. Your thoughts on that?
That's a big word for a reset.
Yes.
A big explanation for what's been happening in the United States. And I will continue to remain hopeful. And I hope that it doesn't just happen here in criminal justice and in policing, but it expands to healthcare and education and economic entrepreneurship and opportunities in this country, that this is a time to unpack every instance of disparity and discrimination that happens against Black Americans in the United States.
Right, but as you're suggesting, I think it is an awful lot to ask and expect as a result of one single judicial case.
I think you're so very right, Jane. I mean, 10 miles away from where this happened, Daunte Wright was killed by the police. While the verdict was being discussed and unpacked yesterday, there was another police shooting of a 16-year-old Black girl in Ohio. This is a systemic thing that is happening in the nation. And even what was occurring in that moment wasn't impacting the response of law enforcement to people in the Black community across the nation.
What would you advocate? What would you want to see from here? Because in the States, I mean, the system is rather different to here in the UK, and individual states and individual jurisdictions have much greater power than perhaps in this country. So some of what we're talking about will come down to state level. It's not a big federal government decision. What can and should individual states, individual police departments be doing, though, to tackle something that has troubled the nation for not just for decades, for centuries?
Jane, now we get to dream. Now we get to put into effect all of the things that scholars and legal analysts have been requesting for years. Qualified immunity is a huge deal. This is the time to look over police unions and really encourage and find better ways to embed the law enforcement that serves the community into the community. What was just mentioned about U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland and the federal investigations that will happen, this is a great time for the United States federal government to step in and require national registries of police misconduct to talk about better data collection so that we can understand what is happening in this nation and we can unroot all of these instances of systemic racism against the Black community.
Yeah, so that's interesting. So you think that announcement that's just been made from the Attorney General, you think that an investigation, a report like that could be useful, could it?
I hope so. I hope that it goes from the Attorney General over to Congress and that many of the acts that have been proposed through the House, through the Senate, will start to really catch traction and that we will start to see significant police reform at the federal, state, and municipality levels.
Professor, very good of you to talk to us here on the BBC. Thanks so much for your time. That is Professor Sonia Rankin, a professor of law at the University of New Mexico. The time is a little after 3:15. These are this afternoon's headlines.